All right, so this is going to be our first demo on Photoshop. Things are going to be a little different than they were before just because Photoshop is a much different way of working with digital images. The Photoshop icon looks like this. It's the PS with a blue square around it or something similar to that. All right, so Photoshop has several similarities to Illustrator and several major differences. First, let's go ahead and open a new file. So we're going to go up to File, New, and you guys, this is what it's going to look like, what the open window is going to be, the default Photoshop size. Everything is listed in inches. It's 7 inches by 5 inches and 72 pixels per inch. This is the old default screen resolution. And as we talked about, 300 dpi or 300 pixels per inch is print quality. Somewhere around 150 to 172 is better for smaller devices like iPhones, things like that. The images need to be higher resolution in order to render well on these higher pixel density screens that we've started getting. One thing that's really important is if you want to print your work from Photoshop, if you start making work at 72 pixels per inch, you can enlarge it, but you're going to lose quality. I do suggest considering using 300 pixels per inch as your default setting when you're working in Photoshop, because you can always scale something down, but enlarging things, you begin to lose resolution, because unlike Illustrator, Photoshop is telling the computer what to do with every single pixel on the screen. It tells it exactly what color to be, whereas in Illustrator, you're drawing shapes and you're saying, put the shape here and make it this size. And with those instructions, you can enlarge or shrink those shapes, and there's no issue because it'll draw a nice clean line at whatever resolution. With Photoshop, that's totally different. But to start with, we're going to go to the web preset, and we're going to start with, it'll start you at 800 by 600, which is really tiny. I'm going to suggest we go with 1280 by 1024. And we're going to leave it in RGB color. We're going to leave the background color to be, contents to be white. We can also choose a specific color or make it transparent. And everything else, we're going to leave it in the working profile, square pixels, all that's good. Oh, and we should just probably call this demo 1 or something like that. This is just the basic introduction to Photoshop and how things work. So to start with, it looks similar in a lot of ways to Illustrator, right? The same basic layout. There are some options here on the right, some different panels and panes that are available. There are a bunch of tools available on the left. And then the top of this is called the options bar. And so whatever tool you select, it's going to change what options are available to you. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that there are no shape drawing tools right away. There's actually some down here, but those are really for special uses. The first tool we see is the Move tool, right? This is the same, it's the letter V. It's kind of like the selection tool in Illustrator. It allows you to essentially select an entire layer, which we'll talk about in a second, and move the layer around and manipulate it, do transforms, i.e. scale, rotate, things like that. You can do with the Move tool, just like you would in Illustrator. The next set of tools down, and this kind of shows you levels of importance, I think. Obviously, we all need to move something, but all these next tools down, except for crop and the eyedropper, these 3 tools are all selection tools, allowing us to select different parts of our artwork. So to start with, we're actually going to grab an image off the internet and start manipulating it to show you how to use selection tools. So we've created this new file. I wanted to show you how to do that, but we're not actually going to use it yet. We will be doing a tutorial on how to use the brushes and get you used to that interface. But so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at selections. We're going to start manipulating a file that we got off the internet. Now, the file I'm using actually came from the Library of Congress. If you go to loc.gov, click on their digital collections, this will open up a ton of different subcategories of images that are available. All of them, by and large, are totally copyright free. You can download them, and they're really high quality. So scrolling through this, I found an image of Uncle Sam at the plate. And so then clicking through, I got this image, and they have several versions available, but I'm going to download the TIFF. Or I did download the TIFF, and you guys can pull it off Blackboard. But this is the highest quality version. This file ends up being 38 megabytes. It's a pretty huge image. And so we're going to use this to show you some of the power of the selection tools that Photoshop has. Okay, so I'm going to go to File, Open, and please take some time, download this file from Blackboard. And okay, so this is the default file. It's a TIFF file. TIFF is it's a great format if you want really high quality. This is what people use to do archival images. So when you start, you have one layer available in Photoshop, which is the background, and it is locked, right? That doesn't mean you can't manipulate it, but it does mean you can't move it around, and there's certain other functions that you cannot do to it. But that's fine. What we're going to do is we're going to start using the selection tools. And to start with, we'll just use the rectangle marquee tool, which is this rectangle type. It does have the little arrow, so you can see that you also can click and hold and get an ellipse, and then these single row marquee tools. So let's say to start with, we want to grab some of this text and rearrange it. Let's say we want to say, Uncle Sam ate the plate late, right? Why not? So to start this process, I'm going to hover over Uncle and Sam. I'm going to keep this as one phrase. And I'm just going to click and drag to select an area around there. And I'm not going to worry about how perfect each of these are, right? And so now I get this, quote unquote, the dancing ants, which is the technical term, right? This is my selection box. Now at this point, I haven't done anything except select these two words. In order to start manipulating them, I need to, in this case, I'm going to copy and paste them. And so I've got this selection going, so I'm going to hit Command-C to copy, or Control-C if you're in Windows, and Command or Control-V to paste. As soon as I do that, you'll see that now I have this additional layer, right? I have the background and I have layer one, and you'll see this tiny little thumbnail shows this little black blob there. That's the text that I copied. So now if I use my Move tool, which again is the letter V, much like the selection tool and what's it called, I can just click and drag on this and move this around, and you'll see that it's moving in layer one, right? So this object is its own layer. So I want Uncle Sam ate the plate late, or something like that. So now what I need to do is I want to just cut out the A, T, and E here. And so I'm going to use my Marquee tool again, and it's the letter M on the keyboard is the quick key for the Marquee tool. And I'm going to start down here where I can kind of see where I'm going. I'm going to click and drag and release. And now I've got this selection area here. If I hit Command or Control-C, now it's going to give me an error. It's going to say could not complete the copy command because the selected area is empty. This is because I have layer one selected. I am currently on layer one. And anytime you see this gray and white checkerboard, that means there's no information there. There's no image there. So it's empty, right? I'm not actually selecting the background. So I have to hit OK. So if I select my Move tool, one of the ways that I can select this layer rather than going over here and clicking is if I right click in the background here, not in the selection area, but just off in the background, you'll see that I have this option to select background. So I'm going to click on this, and it jumps me to the background. So now I can hit Command or Control-C, Command or Control-V, and I can create another layer that has the letters AET in it. And so now I can use my Move tool to bring this over, and I can say Uncle Sam ate. And then I can use the letter V, and I'm just going to go ahead and, the letter M to grab the Marquee tool, because I want him to eat the plate late. So I'm going to grab the plate. I am going to use the letter V as the Move tool, right click, make sure I'm on the background again, copy, paste. And I'm just putting these here. You can put them anywhere. Don't put them over his face because we're actually going to do something with his face here in a little bit. And then one more time, I'm going to use the Marquee tool. And I'm going to grab this, grab that, and hit Command C, Command V. Oops, again, forgot. So letter V, right click, background, Command C, Command V. And then I can put the word late down here. Right, so that's how the basic selection and copying, pasting to create new layers works. It's really simple. Right, but let's say that I just want the letters, or I want some more complex shape to be cut out from the background so I can either add multiple copies of it, flip it, manipulate it in some way, shape, or form. We're going to start with the batter up letters. And we're actually going to jump over the Lasso tool. We're going to come back to that in just a second. But so the next tool we have that allows us to select is the Quick Selection tool. And the way the Quick Selection tool works, and first, before I do anything else, I'm going to make sure I select the background, so I'm actually selecting this area. The way the Quick Selection tool works is that it quickly selects things. As you click and drag, it looks for pixels that are similar in color value to what you already are selecting. So, all right, so you can see that as I continue to draw this, it's just going to keep pulling around and selecting this border. Now this isn't actually what I want to select, but it's doing a pretty good job. Now you will notice that those letters have been totally covered up, which maybe that's what I want in this case. But there's a couple other things. If I zoom in, sometimes there's a little bit where the edge is going to be off or it's not quite right. And we can go in and fix that. This one's looking pretty good. If I want this hard corner, I'm going to have to use another tool to get that, but we'll talk about that in a second. Okay. And again, much like in Illustrator, Option and the scroll wheel, or Alt and the scroll wheel, allows you to zoom in and out pretty dynamically and quickly. You can also hit Command or Control plus or minus to zoom in and out. Okay, so I'm going to deselect this because what I actually want to select are these letters here where it says batter up. Okay, and I'm going to use this tool to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and to deselect something, you either hit Command D on the Mac or Control D in Windows, and that'll deselect your selection area. So I'm going to use the Quick Selection tool again, and this time I'm going to go over the letters here. Now if I just click and drag a little bit, it's very quickly going to select this entire B. And by default, this should be set to add. I want you to look at some of these options up here. We're actually going to look at what Refine Edge does here in a little bit. But there's a few options. First, there's the brush size. I don't know what size the default size is, but this also makes a difference in, essentially it looks at, when you have a larger brush, it looks at all the colors in that brush, figures out the average, and then grabs everything. So it's much sloppier if you have a bigger brush, and when you have a smaller brush, say 6 pixels, which is what I'm doing, you get a much finer edge usually. And it just depends on what you're trying to select. Sometimes it makes sense to do a small brush, sometimes it makes sense to do a big brush. We're not going to worry about the hardness or the spacing right now. The other thing I want you to note is there's 3 ways this tool works. Okay, this first option allows me to create a new selection area, right? So, and you'll notice that it keeps jumping straight back to using the plus sign. That's because that's its default behavior, right? This, in this option, which is what I just used, if you have a selection area already, it's going to get rid of that one and make a new one. The plus adds on to your existing selection area, which is exactly what we want to do. Right? We just want to continue adding on to our selection area. Now the minus subtracts from the selection area. So this can be useful. I might have just made a huge mistake. All right. This can be useful if, say, it's unintentionally selected too much, and we'll take a look at that in a second, right? and you need to deselect some of that. So if I zoom in here on this T, you'll see that there's this little corner where, and there's actually an error here as well, where maybe I want to come in here and just get rid of that little bit. All right, with the minus selected up here, or by holding down Option on the keyboard, I can come in and get rid of that selection area, or get rid of that issue. And then if I go back to plus, I can come in and click and really start to get these areas where, oh, maybe I want some of this red little shadow. Oh, but I selected too much. Now, rather than have to go up and click on these over and over again, if I just hold down Option, it turns this into a minus. And I can come in here and say, oh, I didn't actually want to select this. Now, you'll notice when you're clicking and dragging, it's a little rough, but then once you release, it smooths out the lines and figures out what it did wrong. I'm going to get rid of that a little bit. I'm going to get rid of that a little bit. Now, we could spend a lot of time doing this. Because this is a demo, I'm going to try and stop my obsessive compulsive behavior. All right, and so I'm going to just continue adding letters. Let's go ahead and, let's go ahead and add on to the letter D. Maybe I need to make this a little bit larger because this does not want to select like I want it to. There we go, it's a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to do the U, I'm going to do the P. Okay, so I've got these letters selected. Right, I've got batter up selected. Now I could copy and paste this right now, but there's one other option I really want to show you. And this is only available, it's available under any of the selection area tools. And by the way, if you have it set to add to the selection, which I don't know why they have a different icon here, but this is the same. It's adding to the selection, right? That's the exact same thing as this mode. You can actually, you don't have to just define a selection area with one tool. You can use multiple tools and continue to add to the selection area. So what I can do is, one of the things I can do is I can refine the edge. So if I zoom in here, you can see that aside from some of these areas where I really maybe want to subtract just a little bit more, there we go, and a little bit more here, I do have some rough curves in here, and I'd like these to be smoothed out. So I'm going to click on Refine Edge. Now, once I do that, the default way that Refine Edge is set up is with this red mask over the part that is not selected. Anything that's true color is selected. Anything that's red is not selected. This isn't always the most useful version. I've found that putting this on white is often really a nice way to see what's going on. And so that's what I'm going to do because it's going to be much easier for you guys to see in the demo. The first thing I want to do is I want to smooth some of these edges out. This blob I probably need to fix, but right in here, maybe I can smooth some of that. So under Adjust Edge, I can pull this out, and you'll see that pulling it up to 38 or 45, if I go too far, it's going to round over and kind of disappear all of these corners. Now, anything that's true color is 100% opaque. Anything that's going towards white will be somewhat transparent when I copy it. All right, so this doesn't just copy things that are totally opaque, but so I want this somewhere around 38. Seemed to be pretty good. It smoothed things out enough for my concerns right now. Something else you can do is you can feather the edge. And what that means is that you essentially create, that's a little bit crazy, you essentially create a gradient from full opacity to transparency as you go out from the edges of your shape. Right? And so I'm actually not going to feather this. Contrast kind of does the opposite. It makes this a really, really, really sharp, hard, pixelated cut, which we don't usually want. We want a little bit of softness there. Edge Shift allows you to say, oh, I actually didn't grab quite enough information, or I grabbed too much and I need to trim off a little bit, right? It doesn't do a whole lot, but it does change it somewhat. So really with this, all I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth that edge. The radius, if I crank this up, right, you'll see that this also makes some changes, and we can show the radius. If we check mark this, you can kind of see this is the radius, right? This is the gap, and as I increase this size, right, the radius gets much, much larger. And Smart Radius changes this a little bit. It's thinking really hard because it's smart, right? It's going to make these points a little bit sharper where they're sharper rather than rounding it way out. So I'm going to leave that at, I'm going to uncheck Show Radius. And I'm actually just going to get rid of the radius for now. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. Now this selection area looks almost identical to what I had before, and that's fine. And so now I want to make sure I'm on the background. I'm going to hit Command or Control C to copy, Command or Control V to paste. And now I have layer 5. I'm going to hit the letter V. And now I have 2 copies of this text, right? And it did a good enough job copying it that really, except for a couple issues where I failed to do a good job following up, I have this text that I can set here. Now, you know, maybe I don't need this to say batter up, but what if I wanted to create a stronger drop shadow on this or something? One thing I could do is I can take this layer, and so I have layer 5. This is the layers panel, by the way. And much like in Illustrator where we had the different blending modes, each layer you can set a blending mode for in Photoshop as well. So some of these will look familiar, but there's a lot more options available. So if I start, I'm just going to start with overlay, right? And so overlay, if I zoom in just a touch so you can see here, right, is just making this a little bit darker, and it's blending really nicely with the rest of this image. I don't think we've zoomed all the way in here, but this is at about 100%. So you can see this image is really high quality. It's got every little artifact on it from the original poster or the original print. So I can pull this up here and I can make this look darker. Now if I wanted this to look really good, I'd duplicate this layer twice. Again, so I can bring this up here. So now my text is darker and it's got this little bit larger shadow. In order to nudge things, much like you would in Illustrator, you can use the arrow keys to move it just a smidgen at a time. Right? So, you know, that's one option. You could experiment with different blending modes. You know, what does soft light look like? It's a little bit gentler than overlay. Pin light is much harder. So maybe soft light is a better option for this. Who knows? All right, so that's one other way that you can select objects pretty quickly. Now, what I really want to do with this is, for whatever reason, I think it's a great idea to take his goatee and give him a full beard. And so what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in, and we'll start by using our quick selection tool. So we're going to use the quick selection, and we just need to come in here and, make sure we're on our background layer. And then come in here and just click once and we'll get this area selected. I'm going to make my brush smaller for my selection area. So I went down to 7 pixels. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to expand this a little bit. Okay, so I've expanded my selection area, and there's a few parts that I would really like to keep, right? Because of the way this print is made, it's going to look incomplete if I just have this white edge here. I really need this dark blue line. This is something that Photoshop is not good at doing. We know there's an extra dark blue stroke here that we want on the outside, but because these colors are so close, it's really hard for the computer to determine that there is something there that is of interest. And so we need to use another tool. We need to use a more manual tool. And when we need a manual tool, we go to the Lasso tool. The Lasso has 3 different incarnations. There's the Polygon Lasso tool, which it works like the pen tool in Illustrator when you're clicking. When you just click once, it draws straight lines from point to point. You just click to draw a line. This is great for irregularly shaped but objects that have hard sides. There's also the magnetic lasso tool. And the magnetic lasso tool is pretty great at finding edges. We're going to use that in a bit, maybe to outline one of these stars. But for this, the magnetic lasso would have a really hard time. So we're using the hand-drawn lasso tool. By default, this should be set to add on to an existing selection. And you can see the little plus sign by the lasso. And so for the lasso tool, I just click and drag with my mouse by hand along the line that I want to outline. Now, after a while, it gets hard, like maybe you run out of space with your mouse. So you don't have to do this in a single pass, right? Like this is a pretty good amount of material to have selected. And so to make sure I get that whole area in there selected, I'm going to pull this way around and come back up here close to where I started. It will automatically connect it all the way around, but it'll do a straight line between those last 2 points. So you just want to make sure you go that. Now that I've done that, I can come back in here and I'm going to use my thing to do this. Okay, so really I might even want this section down here. So I'm going to continue down. And you can see there was actually red ink applied over top of that. And that's why this is such a dark color here. And around we go. Now, if you need to do this in more passes than I just did it in, that's totally fine. So the other thing this is great for is and this would be a good time to show what the magnetic lasso can do, but where there's a good solid edge between two things, sometimes the magnetic lasso will work. So let's go ahead and change to the magnetic lasso. And the magnetic lasso, just the basics of it, again, it's set to add to the selection area. So what I want to do is I want to hold down Option so it will subtract from the selection area, because I don't want this little bit, I don't want that little bit either. So I'm going to hold down Option and then click and drag. And then I'm going to let go, and that'll set a point. I'm going to come up here, and it's automatically following that line. And then again, I can just click a few points here, and then I can double click and set that. And so I can come down here, I can hold down Option again, and maybe come to here, click once, and then all I have to do is drag along here. Now you'll notice, right, it's actually having trouble figuring out where it should be as well. And so in this case, I think I am going to use the lasso tool instead. Right? So I'm going to hold down Option. I'm just going to come in here and grab some of that because we just don't want that little bit there. Okay. So I've selected his beard or his goatee. And now I want to copy it and paste it and give him a full beard and a mustache, all using this one goatee as the entire element for that. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command or Control V to copy and paste again. Right? And so now I've got layer 6, which at this point I have no idea, I can't even see what's on this layer. So if I double click on the name of the layer, I can change this to goatee. Okay. So I've got his goatee. If I hit the letter V, I can move this around. And much like in Illustrator, rather than having to copy and paste over and over again, if I'm using the Move tool, I can hold down Option or Alt, and I get the double arrows, meaning I can quickly click and drag to create a copy. And right now, I'm not going to worry about how these are arranged, but I want to create enough copies, and maybe I want one on this side of his chin as well, which means that I probably need to create one more that goes back where the original one was so that I have something that will overlap this. Okay, so here's his beard, and now I need to arrange this so it looks okay. And maybe what I need to do is actually select this one. So now, instead of coming over here and figuring out which copy this is, I can right click over here and it's going to tell me whatever layers are under my mouse. So the background and goatee copy 3 is there. So I'm going to click goatee copy 3. I'm going to pull this back a little bit because I kind of want it to be, it's going to be like right on the side of his face right there. Okay, so now let's go to the layers panel because we actually need to rearrange these. This guy should probably be on top of a couple of these, but layer 2 and layer 1, let's see here. Let's pull this guy up here. And let's pull this guy, and let's pull copy 2 up here. Okay, so I've been rearranging these. I hope you've been rearranging them as well. Now, let's say that I make a mistake, right? I move this guy here, and I move this guy up here, and I realize that I don't want to do that. Now, with Illustrator, if you just hit Command or Control Z repeatedly, you would move back in time. In Photoshop, for some reason, you can step back one step using Command Z or Control Z. And then to step back any additional steps, you have to hold down Option or Alt, Command or Control. So Option, it'd be Alt, Control, or Option, Command, and Z. And then you can step back multiple steps. I don't know why they do this. It's maddening when you're trying to move from one to the other. All right, so I've got this beard. Maybe I want to get rid of one of these and stretch them out a little bit. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna select goatee copy and pull this guy out of here. And then select goatee copy, select goatee. Move this guy over a little bit. All right, so now he's got a full beard. And with this one rogue I've got over here, I'm actually going to rotate it and I'm going to turn it into a mustache for him. And so to rotate things, there is a rotation tool, but you can also just hover over the corner, much like you would in Illustrator, and rotate. And I'm going to bring this guy up here. Now, something that you'll notice sooner or later is whenever you make a transformation or do a transform in Illustrator, such as rotate an object or scale it, you actually have to double click on the object in order to set that transformation. It's just showing you a preview, and you'll notice if I double click on this, it smooths those lines out a little bit, right? So because it's so processor intensive to redraw that thing, it redraws an approximation of it, and then when you double click it, it fixes it and makes it look nice. So now this needs to go up above all of the different goatee layers. And then I need to copy this. And I'm going to hold down Option or Alt, click and drag. And then if I and then when I have it selected, in order to do transforms, I have to go up to the top window to do a more complex transform. I have to go up to the top. I have to go to Edit, and I have to go down to Transform, and whichever one I want to do. In this case, I want to flip this horizontal. So I'm going to flip it horizontal. And now he's got this beautiful flowing mane. And what I may want to do is move this one down in the hierarchy a little bit so that it's so that his mustache is actually hit kind of behind his beard over there. So, that's not going to make a big difference. Oh, we're starting to now. It's sneaking between two of them. And I think if I just go all the way to the bottom, there we go. Now, something I might want to do, if we were to go further with this, is I might want to erase the top two of these pieces so I get a nice clean line here so that I can actually see this as it goes around the edge of that. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll be introduced to the eraser tool. So I need to figure out which layer this is, so I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to say it's probably copy 3. That looks about right. If I'm unsure, I can always turn the visibility on and off. That's a pretty obvious tell. And now I'm going to use the eraser tool. And the eraser looks like your standard block eraser. And it works like a brush, so you can set the size, the shape, the hardness. I'm going to leave it set where it is on mine, which is, it's 70% hard, and it's a 15 pixel brush. You can actually change the modes and how that works and the opacity and everything, but we're going to just stick with some of the basics for now. And I'm just going to go ahead and erase some of this until I get down to the edge of the beard. Now I just want to make sure all of this is gone. All of this is gone to here. Let's see here. Now I could make this much better, but I'm going to leave it where it is. Also, his mustache is overlapping his nose, so I would probably want to copy his nose and paste it on top in order to get this to look better. But for the purpose of the demo, we've done what we wanted to. Now Uncle Sam has this crazy, weird, flowing beard that has this huge, unexplainable gap between his hairline and his jawline. But he is looking good with that beard, right? So we've done this simple manipulation by using the selection tools. So there are several other things that we use selection tools for. It's not just about copying and pasting something. We can use it to select what artwork to apply a different effect to, or to paint. So as an example, let's do one more quick thing to this image and then we'll be done. All right, so the quick selection tool again, we're going to grab, and we're going to zoom in on his pants a little bit. And then we're just going to click and drag on the red stripes. And nothing happens. And that is because there is no color here, right? I'm on this layer. I need to make sure I'm back on the background. And now, right, there we go. I'm starting to select the red stripes. Now, if I accidentally select the white stripes, I can always hold down Option and click in the white area and get rid of some of this stuff that was selected unintentionally, right? Because I don't want that. I just want the red selected. And I'm going to do a sloppy job of this because it's a demo. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try and see if I can grab this leg. And you'll notice each time it really wants to select the white, I'm just going to go in and unselect the white, which goes pretty quickly. And I'm going to do this stripe as well. I'm just going to go ahead and go all the way down this guy's leg here. And then hold down Option, get rid of that white section. Get rid of this stuff as well, don't need it. Get rid of this area here. Get rid of this area here and here. Okay, so now I've got this area on his leg that's colored red. So let's use our brush tool. And again, this time I have the opacity, I'm going to zoom in on this. I have the opacity set to 62%, the flow set to 51%. Again, we're not going to talk about what that means now. Opacity probably makes plenty of sense, but we're going to use those. And then we're going to put this in overlay, right? So this mode is the blending mode. So for every brush stroke you make, you can tell it to blend it in a particular way. And so we're going to do overlay. Okay, so this is where the foreground and background colors are. The foreground color is the color I'm going to use to paint with my brush. So I'm going to double click on this because I actually want this to be yellow of some tone. And I'm going to make it, that's a little muddy. Let's bring this back. There we go. I'd like it to be kind of mustardy. but maybe a little mustardy, a little oranger. There we go, a little higher up on there. All right. So now I'm going to use my brush, and just one last thing about the brush. If you need to quickly increase or decrease the size of your brush, you can use the opening and closing brackets keys to do so, just like you would in Illustrator. And now I'm just going to paint in here. Now you'll see that I'm going to undo that. All right, I actually want to come in and just have it kind of fade as it goes down his leg, maybe be a little bit higher there. But you'll see that I was able to preserve the white, the cream color of his white stripes, but change the color of his pants, right? I could make this blue or whatever color I wanted to. Overlay is also a nice option because it's preserving all of that texture that was in the original drawing. It's not just filling it with a flat color. And so now if I hit Command D, I can deselect that, or Control D. Right? And so now it looks like maybe we turn this into a fiery bat, and we're actually going to add some yellow highlights on him to show him like having this, I don't know, fiery bat that he's swinging. But right, so you can really quickly use your selection tool to choose what areas of an image you recolor or repaint. Okay, so those are the basics of the selection tool. I'd like you to experiment more, maybe add different things onto him, change this image as much as you'd like to, so you can begin to experiment with how these different tools work.